Hello and welcome to Motorsport's 2023 F1 season preview. I'm Joe Dunn and I'm joined today by not one, two, but three of our esteemed F1 writers. Mark Hughes, our Grand Prix editor.
Hello.
Johnny Herbert, our F1 columnist.
Yes, hello as well.
and James Elson, our staff writer. And we're going to be chewing the cud, shooting the breeze, and analysing a great season, a massive season, a 23 race season that we're looking forward to for the rest of the year. So let's dive in straight away and ask Mark, what are you particularly looking forward to when the cars line up in Bahrain later on?
The big hope is that we've got at least two teams, preferably three teams, with nothing between them at the front. It was, a season of dominance last year, which is, I don't mind really. I don't think each season's different, isn't it? So, but it would be fantastic if we had a competitive Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, and if they were separated by a tenth between the three of them. That would be the dream, but let's see.
I'm going to agree because we spoke about this last year, thinking we were going to have a three-way battle, and it sort of didn't quite materialise. Started off, Ferrari were looking good, that sort of petered off, and then the domination of Red Bull was cool, and then Mercedes didn't sort of get it together. But yeah I hope that everybody else, Ferrari and Mercedes, have sorted it out.
You'd think, just logically, I mean, the real world always just destroys any pre-season logic, usually, doesn't it? But you'd think that there's more low-hanging fruit, certainly for Mercedes and maybe for Ferrari as well from their power unit, than there is for Red Bull, because they'd got it so right by the second half of last season. So you'd think for the Mercedes, although there were lots of symptoms of the car that weren't good, when you talk to them, they all seem to come from the same source. So if they understood that and they can attend to that, you'd think they should be somewhere close. And for Ferrari, they were saying that post-Baku, after those power unit failures, they were running in quite significantly detuned form. Yeah. And that's fixed now, so therefore they can dial it back up. So they're, again, more low-hanging fruit, potentially. So we'll see. It's probably rubbish.
Well, you remember there's been some rumours recently as well, isn't it? 30 horsepower. Yeah, I don't think so.
I think they were saying that's how much they detuned it by. So I think what they're getting at is that we're not. It's a very sensitive subject, isn't it? Sure. Because in theory you can't do performance developments, but you can do reliability developments. But of course, if it's more reliable, you can run it harder. But I think 30
horsepower mile. If
yeah,
that is true. That's
I think big. Yeah, they were implying that they were sort of 2/10 short after Baku because they had to protect the ERS H. And I think that's been translated as well. That's about 30 horsepower then, isn't it? But it's not really like that with a hybrid unit, because it's about where the power is and where you fill it in with the electrics and all that. So it's maybe not 30 horsepower, but it will, I think, be significantly better than it was post-Baku. And pre-Baku, of course, it was clearly the fastest engine, the best engine, but of course, not much point in that if it doesn't last. No.
Well, and I suppose it's not just reliability for Ferrari. I mean, there's been changes at the top. There's been the team morale, team organisation, and in a strange way, you'd expect Mercedes almost was the inverse of Ferrari when it came last season, in the sense that Mercedes had problems with their car, but made the most of it. Ferrari had a very good car, but conspired through strategy errors and reliability for it not quite to work out. Do you think those things will even out in 2023?
That would be the hope. There's still potential for things to go wrong at both those teams. It's not inconceivable that Mercedes hasn't properly nailed the root problem. It's conceivable that Ferrari hasn't properly nailed the reliability problems or the strategy problems. So it's still up in the air, and I think that's why this is always such a fascinating point of the year, where you're thinking, how is it going to be? Because once it's happened once, it becomes the norm very quickly. If there's like a shock of, suddenly, like last year, just how quick that Ferrari was at the start of the year, that wasn't really expected. But it became the norm very quickly. For the first half of the year, that was the fastest car. But, who knows? I don't know.
Well, I hope it's a positive, because all the strategy calls they had last year, the ones that were obvious for people sort of sitting in their chair watching it on TV, what are you doing? They knew it was wrong. And then Bonotto, in his ways, unfortunately, I think, when he sort of came in front of a TV, said, no, we still, stick with our strategy, and it was correct. And you're going,
yeah,
what?
I think it was.
So, but that's something that has got to be now different with Fred Vasseur. He's got to take hold of that and make sure that they are on top of it. That's what he's up against. Someone like Red Bull and Merck, who are very much always on top of it. They don't make many mistakes.
Yeah, and I think on the one hand, Matteo Bonotto was trying to protect the team publicly.
Yeah, but I think it's a very hard thing to protect it when it's so obviously going wrong, and especially when with France, at that Grand Prix there was the radio communication with Carlos Sainz, for example, after Charles had his issue, and then there was a break to try and sort it. And they just carried on doing exactly the same thing. So that's where Fred has got to change the mindset.
And Fred was talking about it in his first media session as Ferrari boss, and he's saying that he's only been there a couple of weeks, so he's seeking to get a proper understanding of exactly what was behind each of those decisions. And the point he makes is that the communication is probably not ideal. The channels of communication. It sounds as like he was saying there's an awful lot of people piling in with their ideas, and they're not always the same ideas. And it needs someone that is.
Yeah, but it also got to a point, I think, is where you had their driver deciding with his engineer the strategy. And that's something they can't carry on. And why I say that from a driver's perspective, they've got to take the pressure off of Charles. Yeah. Max, Lewis, George, Sergio, the teams try to relieve them of the other external pressures that are there. But because it's Ferrari, there's all the other pressures that are there. And they've got to relieve their drivers of that. And that's something hopefully Fred can do.
That goes back a long time. I mean, we used to hear Fernando Alonso calling the strategy because... I remember once when they'd call them in, he said, why are we coming in now? And they said, for the undercut. He said, he's 3 seconds up the road. We're not going to get undercut with this level of tyre deck. And they said, oh, yeah, stay out. So, that was ages ago. That's Fernando Alonso here. We used to hear Sebastian Vettel do it. We heard Carlos Sainz do it a few times last year.
We've seen Lewis. We've heard Lewis do the same thing, actually. Yeah. Don't see it so much from Max, strangely enough.
Yeah.
That seems to be, maybe he's just in a sort of a better situation at the time. So, but it's things like that Ferrari, for our sake, have got to really get a hold of that. And you're right, Fred is in the very early stages of his time there, but his background's very, very strong. So hopefully that will come and pay dividends.
Yeah, I mean, I would come back, obviously, talk about the drivers in a minute. We haven't mentioned Red Bull in all of this. I hear Christian Horner already saying that they may have suffered from their wind tunnel penalty hangover from the previous years. How do you think they're going to come out of the blocks in Bahrain?
Oh, I'd be amazed if they were anything other than super strong. They're not just got the advantage of momentum. That concept of car, obviously very right, but they're just a super efficient team. And of course, they've got taken 2 hits on the wind tunnel time, one with a position in the Constructors' Championship and one with the penalty for the cost cap breach. But it's still. I don't think that's going to make a night and day difference. It will for sure be different. It will make a difference, and for sure there will, the way they convert tunnel time to lap time. It's pretty amazing, really. But so there will be an effect, but I think they're just too good to write off as a super competitive force.
And I think it probably won't harm them much at all. The CFD is probably the most prominent, strongest tool that they have. A wind tunnel in many respects is a bit of a checker before it goes onto the car. It's not really the wind tunnel that does all the work. It's the CFD, and that hasn't changed.
what's interesting, isn't it? And just on Red Bull, I suppose, how do you think that the loss of Mateschitz is going to affect the team? I mean, it's such a strong team, as you mentioned, Mark, and he was kind of integral to it in the way that he sort of let them get on with it, but I guess he was a presence always there. I just wonder whether that will affect how they operate.
That's a very interesting long-term question, because his management style, he's hugely respected now and enormously popular, but within the team. But his management style, as you say, was very much, right, I put my lieutenants in place and I leave them to it, and I just provide a budget, and they're the good people that know how to and that's why the team is. It's a very simple team. It's not really in a way that it's layered and structured. It's like a big F3 team, really. It's nothing very complicated and structured. I think that's partly why it works so well. He's been replaced by two people, with the responsibilities have been divided up, and we don't, they're not from Formula One. They're from other parts of the Red Bull empire. So we don't really know how that dynamic is going to work, and whether it changes something important. We don't know yet.
Yeah, and I think with the loss of Mateschitz, I think, like you say, Mark, with the new team that they've got, but they had a really good synergy with Mateschitz, and I think that synergy is only going to carry on, and I think that won't affect the team in any shape or form. So the strength of them is going to be what we've seen in the last sort of couple of years, and that will continue for sure.
So just want to quickly sort of run through some of the other teams then, and especially the mid-table. And I guess the key question is whether that fourth, fifth team, Alpine, McLaren, can they make the jump into the top three and make it a four-way fight? You talked about a three-way fight. I mean, which is most likely, and how could they potentially do it?
I think, for me, Alpine. I think they've probably got the ingredients to sort of improve on what they had last year. Reliability is going to be a big thing they need to clear up. If they can do that, then we know they would have been much further down the road as far as being further away from McLaren but closer to the top three. I think there's been a lot of movement behind the scenes as well. I've heard there's a lot of people gone from Mercedes, for example, have moved across, so that experience hopefully is going to pay dividends as well. The two drivers, Esteban Ocon and of course Pierre Gasly, I think is going to be a positive thing, because I think both drivers will be able to sort of push each other's limits, but then it's down to the team itself to be able to produce the car that will actually give them that opportunity, and I do believe that they are probably in the slightly stronger position compared to McLaren. We're going to have to wait and see how that McLaren can sort of get that next level or two levels that we need, because you're right, to try and get another team in that mix of the top three teams would be absolutely brilliant. I think Alpine have a chance of that, but I think they need not one jump or two, probably three jumps of performance to really be able to sort of be in the mix.
That big regulation reset of last year increased that gap that you're talking about, that gap between the top three teams and the rest, which very often happens with big regulation reset. The well-resourced teams suddenly increase the gap, and then the other steadily erode it. And if you go back to 21, the last season of the old regulations, McLaren was sort of in the middle of that gap. They on a good day they could mix it like a Monza, and then we saw Lando get pole at Sochi back in 21. So they were sort of, they weren't in the top three, but they on a good day they were close enough that they could be in the mix. And I think that's all we could hope for 1 year on from the regulation reset. And yeah, I agree with Johnny. Alpine's the team that when you chart their progress seems to be making the most consistent progress and just going step by step by step. Everything they do seems to be a little bit better than they had before. McLaren has been a bit up and down, and they had the same fundamental problem expressed in a slightly different way with the car in the last two seasons. So they have got real question marks about the existing wind tunnel until a new tunnel comes on stream, which is not going to play their part in this car. So there's questions there. The other one, I would be disappointed if it wasn't very much in that mix of best of the rest, is Aston Martin, because they've invested so much. They've got some very high-profile names there, and yeah, you could sort of see that last year it was a valid sort of reason that it was a bit too early to put all those people together and to see the effect straight away. But you know, they'll be running out of excuses if they're not at least in that mix next year.
Yeah. Well, we'll hear from Fernando if that is the
I
if
think
that is the case.
Fernando will point it out for us.
Yes,
Yeah.
but that is a good thing for Aston Martin,
completely.
to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Whatever you think of Fernando, and we all know he's still got the wow factor when he's in the cockpit, but it's also that drive and push that he will put the pressure on the team to produce what they need to be able to start winning races and towards a championship. But it's in a similar situation. A lot of investment has gone in, but a lot of that is down the line. That's probably in a couple of years' time when the wind tunnel, for example, sort of comes online for them. I know they've got their one they use in Brackley, but I think Fernando is an important factor with this, being able to push that team in a good position. And then I think even Lance, I think it's a good thing for Lance, to be perfectly honest. You know, I think he did a brilliant job against Sebastian. Whatever you think is a Sebastian at the end of his career, he was still there or thereabouts, I think, as far as performance goes. But I think Fernando, we know, is definitely still on top of his game. So I think again that will be a very interesting sort of driver lineup that I think could excite us in different ways. But I think we've got to see that start of that movement of performance from Aston Martin for sure. So I agree with you, Mark. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right about. I mean, that driver dynamic will be fascinating, and you mentioned pressure there. I mean, I guess all three of those teams that we've just talked about will be under some pressure. I mean, there is massive investment in Aston Martin. All teams are under pressure, but particularly maybe Aston Martin. I mean, Alpine, essentially a manufacturer team. You'd expect them to be up there with those. With the McLaren have that great history, and they've been promising so much. And in Lando, they've got a great driver. So I guess. The excuses will be wearing thin if at the end of this season, or if they're halfway through this season, things aren't coming right for any of those guys. Bowles, what do you think he will bring to the team? Will he be able to finally get Williams away from being at the back of the grid?
I think what he brings is the type of personality that might create a bit of unity there, and I think that's, by all accounts, that has been lacking there for several seasons, and it's quite a common story that when things are going badly, they begin to go worse, and there's the competition between the departments and within the departments, and nobody wants to be part of the failure, and everybody thinks it's someone else's fault, and all that culture becomes a bit poisonous. And over the years, I think that's definitely been part of Williams's problem, and what James has got to do is stop that and get everybody firing in the same direction. And I think he's the sort of personality that can do that, and he's very engaging and very bright. In terms of engineering input, it's already happened. The car's already, as he arrives there, it's well on the. So I don't think he's got any. Will be able to have any input into this season on that, but in just in getting the team firing properly and getting it, becoming a team again, and then you can start to do your assessments of where's the investment needed, where the recruitment's needed, who do we bring in, who do we need to reallocate it. All those things can come after that, but I think the main thing, the first thing, the order of priority has got to be that unity, that culture.
Yeah, I probably have a small question mark just because of chief strategist. He's done a very good job on that. The software that he's produced has been, very beneficial to Mercedes. But a team principal is a very different world of pressure for one. Expectations suddenly sort of appear on your shoulders where you've really never had that because you've just been a part of the machine at Mercedes. But now it's actually down to you. And that is where now he's got to prove his worth for sure. And I agree with you, Mark. There's a lot of things that sort of need to be changed at Williams to sort of put him in a much better position. So that's choosing the right people, like you say. But can he do that? Is that something he's able to do? I know it's a team thing as well. I know it's not just one person who makes all the decisions. But has he got the same character as Toto or or Christian, for example. He's a nice.
Yeah.
He comes across as a very nice character. I don't know if has he got the edge, that edge to sort of be conniving. You got to be conniving to be able to produce the goods. So that one's going to be very interesting to watch.
It's a good test for him. It's a really
good test,
and
it's a massive test.
If you think of him as, he's been effectively Toto's right-hand man for quite a while at Mercedes.
Yeah, but you're always under his wing.
Yes, under his wing. That's why I'm saying maybe when he presented the news to Toto, maybe Toto was thinking, well, actually, that's not a bad. If he's thinking of succession plans for himself, in that role, not as a part owner of the team, I think he'll always be that. But if he's thinking in terms of how do I replace myself as team principal, and he's thinking maybe James, but I don't know about because of all the things that you've just said. Oh yeah, great. Go on, let's see how he gets on there. And then at least he's better informed when he's making that decision. I bet that's gone through Toto's mind.
Wouldn't be surprised. Wouldn't be surprised. But it's good. Again, that just makes it more interesting. We've got what's going to be going on the track, but we've also got a few little changes, as we know, with team principals in other teams. So there's going to be little stories coming from that. And hopefully with Williams anyway, I always hope that they sort of get themselves back into a situation of where they can start challenging, and then that motivation will hopefully put them in that what we're talking about earlier on of getting in the mix with the top three.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, I remember, Johnny, you wrote a very, very good column, I thought, around that appointment and made that exact point about the character, and you compared that appointment not entirely favourably with some of the great team bosses that you'd worked under, and this idea that you have to be a kind of a force of nature or a buccaneering type character to kind of make those teams work. And it seems that it's maybe indicative of how the sport is changing, that you're getting a new generation of team principals who maybe aren't exactly like they were 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, and I hope it works, because actually I like the way James puts himself out there. And I do get frustrated sometimes with sort of Christian when we had it all banging on the radio, trying to sort of change the mindset of the stewards and everybody else, and Toto as well has got an element of that as well. So it's very different now to what we used to have. A team principal was a team principal and an owner, when now it's the middleman to the board, a Mercedes with Toto, for example, or Christian with Red Bull as well. So it's a very different thing. It's a little bit of a closed-knit community at Williams. There isn't that. It is a small team. It's still the Williams of old in many respects. And that probably there's a closer link to the position that James is in. But of course, that only creates more pressure as well.
Well, it's like a Premiership soccer mentality now to team principals, isn't it?
Yes.
Because they are
started
employees.
To be that way. Yes.
Whereas before they were owners, and if their team, and if they didn't do well, so what? They'd make sure they did better in the future. First time around, Ron Dennis at McLaren, had disastrous seasons among great seasons, but it was never questioned.
No,
that he would continue to be leading the team. Of course, it was his team. It's not that dynamic.
No,
it's not really.
No. Sir Frank and Patrick went through the same thing. There were some good days and there were some bad days. Enzo Ferrari had some good days and some bad days as well. So it's part and parcel of the sport.
Do you think, just finally on Williams, do you think that that appointment says anything about how the owners, Doralton, what their plans are for the team? There was talk at one point of them coming in and selling the team on. I mean, that looks maybe more unlikely now. I mean, does it give any hint as to what their plans are, or what their long-term, medium-term planning is?
Well, the fact that they've made changes suggests that they're not looking at an imminent sale, because just having the existence of a team at the moment, it is a very valuable asset, and I'm sure they could have sold on for considerable profit if it was just a case of buying the team to flip it, as it were. They would have done so by now, and the fact that they've run the changes suggests that they do want to see the team make progress, and then of course it becomes more valuable, so it might be an investment decision as well. So as well as a sporting one.
But they've made a good decision personally with Logan Sargent as well, an American. Everything's been going very well, obviously after what we've had with Netflix and everything else. So I've watched him in his Formula 3 days, and he's progressed very, very well, and he's in the right type of team to sort of maybe show what he's all about. But of course then you've got Alex Albon at the same time, who I like, and I think he's got a nice way about him. He's a good racer at the same time. We want to see a little bit more performance probably from him at the end of the day. But I think Logan may be that type of character on the circuit that will be able to push Alex, and that's always, as I always go back to, it's always pushing each other, and they normally get the best out of it. But I think Logan was a good choice for
Who's the guy that pushed you the most?
Probably, well, Michael, but it was a very different sort of situation. But Mika.
Yeah.
Mika was something.
When you had equal opportunity.
Very rare. Well, as you remember with Mika, when we used to, early days, we used to discuss what was happening on the track. Oh, I did this line, or I tried that line, that was a little bit different, shifted a bit differently here, short shift, blah, blah, blah. And then there was a point, I think Keke went, "Oi, Mika, stop talking." And the relationship sort of changed on that point. But that's part and parcel of being a driver. You're always going to have a good relationship, but you've got to be selfish at the same time, and it's always this thing. It's a team thing, but as a driver, you're still on your own trying to produce what you need. So there is a team element, but there is a selfishness that you need to be a driver who can achieve. And I think Fernando is one of those strong characters that shows exactly that.
Well, that leads us nicely into drivers, and I just want to bring James in here and ask James, 3 rookies this season. Who are you looking forward to seeing the most?
Well, I think really the big question mark is over Oscar Piastri in one sense, because he's rocketed through the junior series. Looked like the new prodigy of this generation, but then had a year out, done a kind of sideways shift to a team that's at a similar level to Alpine. So it'd be interesting to see whether that incredible, prodigious form carries on into 2023, and how he measures up against Lando Norris, who just saw off Daniel Ricciardo with ease. Well, not with ease, but appeared easy from the outside, but with apparently a difficult car to drive. So that'll be interesting to see. And then also Nick de Vries as well, so impressive in everything he's done. It had to swallow being dropped as a McLaren junior. Went to Mercedes, Formula E champion there. So again, it'd be interesting to see if, again, great form in other series translates into racing for AlphaTauri at the back of the grid.
And Johnny, I suppose same question to you. What do you mentioned Logan? I mean, who else kind of excites you out of the 3 new guys?
Well, again, Nick is always someone who's come through in a very, very quick way. It's the same situation with Piastri as well. They've got nice elements of the skill set that you need to be able to drive a Formula One car. The problem comes, I think, sometime. We've seen this in various situations where someone might jump into this. Do Pierre, horrible to use names, but use Pierre when he jumped into the Red Bull. The pressures that suddenly come on your shoulders take away that sort of raw ability that you have, because you're having to deal with things that you never expected to happen. And then you've got a teammate that every time you think that was a good lap, you look up at the screen and you go, I'm still 1.5 seconds off, or a second off, or a half a second off, whatever it may be. That is going to be the difficult thing for them, because in Formula E or in F2, it's a very, very sort of stress-free place to be, and you can absolutely do the job that you need to do. Formula One is a very, very different world, and that is where we have to see their strength shine through. Experience is one thing, raw pace is another, but being able to absorb all the pressure that would be on you from the team, from the media and everybody else is a very, very hard thing. And some people can deal with it, some can't. But they're in the right teams, I have to say. I think McLaren is very good, AlphaTauri is nice as well, Williams have the same sort of vibe about them. So that is where hopefully they'll be able to sort of show us what they've got.
It's really interesting. How many races can it take to settle down? Do some drivers get it immediately, or does it? How long would you give the guys to deal with those pressures? You know?
It's, in the world we live in, I think it's got to happen immediately. Because if it doesn't, you start getting all the criticism, and then once the criticism starts, you start hearing about the criticism. It then sort of affects what's happening in the cockpit at the same time, and you've got to jump in there and just go bang and do it. You know, you do Mick Schumacher. You know, he came in, he was given a bit of a chance, and it didn't quite work out for him. There was all the pressures of Dad, Michael. There was all the pressures of the Schumacher name, and it didn't quite work out for him. Was he good enough? I think he was good enough, but he wasn't good enough all the time, because doing one good race is pretty sort of easy. Doing two good races is pretty much not a problem. It's doing it every single time you go out, and that's the expectations the teams have on you. So it's not a simple thing, but the ones who have that sort of raw talent are normally able to deal with the pressures that they're under. You know, Alex Albon with Williams, the same thing there with Logan. He had a good sort of younger formulas, karting and all the way through to F2, and then he had that short little time. But he got into the Red Bull and it didn't work out for them. But he's done better since he's dropped out of it. But he dropped better because of those pressures are less. That's where the strengths start to shine through. So to me, it's got to happen very, very quickly, because then you're just showing that you've got something a little bit special.
Yeah, there's a sort of spiral in energy with young drivers, and you can, if it's going upwards, you can sort of ride the wave, and you create good performances because you're on that wave, which creates more. But it can go the spiral downwards as well, and that's the tricky bit. And if you look at Oscar, he's riding that wave. He's ridden that wave all through his career, and he's now arriving at a really, really tough gig, because he's going to be measured against Lando Norris, who I think is operating at absolute elite level now. I think he would be fighting for a world championship if he were in the right car, and you're going straight up against that and being measured against that as a rookie. And although that's, I believe, the level that Lando is operating at, it's not the general perception because he hasn't done it yet. So you're being measured against someone that's not rated maybe as highly as his real performance is, and you're a rookie. So for Lando, for Oscar, he's got to really try and keep that momentum going and do enough to he's got to give Lando a hard time, and that in your rookie season, that's not a given, no matter how good you are. So that's his thing. With Nick, he took. I mean, a big thing of it is grabbing opportunities when they're thrown in front of you, and he did a brilliant job standing for Alex at Monza, and that created this opportunity. And the one opportunity has created another one, and he's got to try now to do as good a job with that opportunity as he did with the previous one, and measured over a season. And again, you mentioned against your teammate Yuki. His reputation's not that high, but I think last year he's beginning to operate at a pretty good, consistent level. Pierre Gasly didn't annihilate him last year. It was quite close in performance between the two. So not necessarily an easy gig either. So.
Yuki was just basically consistency. Yeah. That was probably his biggest issue. But that's something you can capitalise on as a teammate. Yeah. And then once you get on top of him, you then control him at the same time. So there's all those little mind battles that you've got to deal with as well.
Then the team starts to merge towards you, and then
exactly, and then all this energy gets positive. Exactly.
But as I say, it can be the other way just
very
as easily.
Quickly. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And Logan, I guess he's got a little bit more time to establish his credibility. He's come in absolutely as a rookie, with not as much expected of him and not as much expected of the team. But he's got a pretty high standard to measure up to, and his teammate Alex as well. So they're all very tough gigs, but it should be tough, and it's supposed to be tough. It's the top level of the sport, Yeah.
And what about Lewis and George, and how do you see that relationship playing out? I thought it was one of the sort of intriguing subplots of last year, and how those guys work together, and how do you see that sort of playing out over the next 12 months or so?
It's going to be tough, I think, for Lewis, but it's also going to be tough for George as well. And the one who's probably, I think, is in the better situation at the moment is George, because George had such a good season last year. You know, he put Lewis under a lot of pressure, a lot of probably head scratching going on as well, because his performances were good. Not just he could do a one lap and then it was all a bit sort of average or whatever, Joe average when it came to a race. It was good in qualifying, and it was brilliant when it came down to a race at the same time. You can't rule out Lewis. Lewis is, it's not as if he's finished. No, he's not. He's still hungry. I think the 8 is still an important thing for him to be able to achieve. Mercedes have got to give them both the cars. But that dynamic with those two, I have to say, is probably, I think, the most exciting pairing that we've got in Formula One at the moment. And there is going to be a crossover. There is going to be when George eventually will start to control what's going on, which then will be, well, Mercedes will know that's our future. And that dynamic is going to be brilliant. But Lewis is not going to give it up. That is for sure. And I think that is going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I mean, their seasons in comparison to each other went in phases last year, didn't they? Where Lewis was a little bit slow off the blocks and George was quick. And then as Lewis sort of the realised where the car needed to be run and then give up on trying to unlock the potential that the wind tunnel said was there, but which was always a mirage. Once he got his head around that, then he became quicker, and George had a few, difficult races, and then George regrouped after his little incident at Aston at turn 1, and he came back strong again. So I think they're both incredible drivers, and I think whenever you compare, if someone is of that caliber, of equal caliber, say in just the basic raw ability, and he's the younger guy, over time, obviously he will be the one that prevails, but he might not be quite of that caliber, and so that's the last little bit there.
The last little bit, yeah.
And it also from Lewis's perspective, even though he will know that eventually the skills will begin to dim. Yeah, doesn't have to be now, does it?
No,
it could be 5 years down the line.
Absolutely, yeah.
It could be many more wins and championships in them yet.
But his worry will be George is only going to get stronger.
Exactly.
That's the thing, and he's only going to get stronger. Yeah, as you said, a bit of a mixed bag during the season. Brazil, now that was a game changer for him mentally. Yeah. Everything that sort of you feel when you're a driver, that is suddenly going to put you on another level, and that level I think will be carried through.
And to have Lewis right on your exhaust pipe for the last however many laps it was,
deal with it, and deal with it brilliantly.
And he just didn't put a foot wrong. That was very
next time that happens, I don't think it would be that close, Lewis.
The other interesting dynamic, and sorry if this is jumping into a question that you're about to ask, Joe, is Max and Lewis. We saw the instant he gets a car that's competitive with a Red Bull, they crash again. We're back to 21. So for George, that's quite interesting. If that's going to be if that dynamic is just locked in between those two, because neither will give up anything to the other one, George, that's very interesting to George, isn't it? If the car's competitive, because he can just sit there and watch.
Again, he capitalise on that. But he capitalise on it, and that's the whole thing about being up against your teammate.
Because Max doesn't get into these scrapes with other drivers. Lewis doesn't get into these scrapes.
It's an interesting one. There always is this why, and then I can probably go back to Felipe Massa and Lewis.
Yeah, I mean he was all over the place,
and they were doing the same thing. They were crashing each other there. But they're similar. Sort of Felipe and Max in some ways are very similar characters. And I always get annoyed with the rules of who's up the inside, where you're not ahead, so it's not your corner, but you can't turn right because there's a car there. But that doesn't seem to be the case with the rule, because the rule says you're still ahead. That's not racing, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, but Felipe and Max, and with racing against Lewis, they have the same sort of mindset. They never give up. But there are occasions sometimes, if we do it going into this season where it's Max and Lewis and they're all fighting it all out, they've got to be smart. And there have been occasions, I think, where that smartness hasn't come out, and they're probably going to lose out if Ferrari.
Yeah, if you've got a Charles Leclerc sitting there, or you've got a George sitting there,
then you've got to be smart.
Exactly,
then you can't get involved. And there are those occasions where sometimes they shouldn't have done. They got away with it because each of them sort of, or Max sort of benefited, I suppose, down the line. But that's racing. You know, he benefited, but that's the way it's sort of the cookie crumbles sometimes. But that's what's great for us, because it is not going to be easy for anybody else. And if George suddenly sort of is the next guy, how's that relationship going to be with Max as well? And it's all nice that, you know, Max is saying, I really enjoy racing with Charles and everything else, but they're completely different characters. But that's where he feels he can control what Charles does on the racetrack. So it's this wonderful sort of mental battle that we saw with Senna and Prost, for example, you know, and Mansell and Piquet. You know, we've seen so many of those, or Michael and Damon. You know, it's brilliant to see that these guys will be tested. There's an element of sort of being a little bit smart and not getting yourself in a position that actually you could have avoided. You know, if we do Silverstone, if Max had sort of given up that Copse Corner incident that we saw, it wouldn't have gone to Abu Dhabi anyway. Yeah. Just for example. So it's little things like that. But I love what Max does in a race car. Love it.
It's interesting. It's fascinating, as you say, these little subplots as they play out. What do you think kind of brings out those characteristics, specifically between Max and Lewis that you mentioned about? What kind of, it seems that they act differently together than they do against other drivers, and what do you think drives that?
I think Max sees Lewis as you know, the target. He's the one with the reputation when he came in. I remember when Max was asked in his rookie season, did he think Lewis was the best driver? You know, because he was winning this sequence. He said, I don't know, give me his car, I'll tell you. And it was, you know, he was totally confident he could take Lewis on right there, right then. You know, whether he could or not, you know, that's his belief. And so, you know, he spent all those seasons in a car where he couldn't prove that, and 21 he finally gets the car. And so obviously, you know, you're not going to be thinking, I'm just going to race this guy like he's anyone else. He is still of a certain stature, and I think that's part of it. Lewis identified Max very early as the one. And I think you did a thing in car with Lewis at Aston, and you were saying, right, imagine you've got Max up your exhaust pipe, what do you do here? And he said, well, that's the thing with Max, you don't know. You don't know what to do, because you can't predict what he's going to do. And it's already in his head. Yeah, Max is in his head. So that's, you know, that's a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah. And that's how it should be. That's exactly what racing drivers should be trying to do, is put yourself in their head, sort of destroy them. The lovely thing, I think, with Max as well, we've got to remember, is he's getting better and better. We go back 2 years with the incident that we had during that sort of that season. He's way more mature now. He's matured so quickly.
Even last year.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So quickly. That is going to make him a total different challenge for everybody else.
Well, that's a good point, Matt. How much better can Max get?
Sadly, still a lot. There's a lot of room for improvement. A lot of room.
He's
from all angles.
He's smoothed off a lot of the rough edges, and there's still areas to, and he's still massively motivated to do it. And when you look at the hours, just for example, the hours he spends on a sim, it's just unreal. And he doesn't consider that, you know, that's his pastime. You know, but hugely motivated to be as good as the best sim racers. And it's the same process. It's the same process that he, you know, used different skills, or slightly some overlapping, but not quite the same skills. But he still wants to be the best at that, and he's made massive progress at that. So, you know, he's still incredibly motivated, and I don't think we've seen the limit yet.
No, definitely not. I think perfection hasn't quite happened yet for him in his head. But I do remember Alain Prost, multiple world champion, saying even if in his last race he was still learning. So I think that says it all. So there's a lot to come from Max.
Well, it's a frightening thought.
It's a good thought.
Dominance
It's a good
last
thought.
season, yeah. And just finally on drivers, I know we've mentioned Alonso, but obviously big fans of his. And what do you think he's going to bring to Aston Martin, and that will help move the team forward? And what will he get out of Aston, I suppose?
Well, that energy that Johnny was talking about before is a big thing, and just we know what he can do in the cockpit. It's he's still absolutely at the elite level, and just when you saw that lap he did, put himself on the front row in the wet at Montreal, it was sort of confirmation of that. But he's done some fantastic races in his comeback seasons, so that you can tick that box. That's the performance. It's obviously a given, but it's that energy. It's that he's impatient for weaknesses. He won't tolerate. If he sees something that should be being done better, he won't just let it go. It's going to be like a dog with a bone, and the team also know this and understand it, and then that brings a different dynamic to everything. And it puts a bit of urgency in the team, I think, which I think probably requires.
Yeah, but it's quite fitting, I think, the position he's going to be in. I know with Lawrence is a petrol head. He wants this to work. He wants it to be challenging for race wins and then ultimately that World Championship. And that sort of mentality that Fernando has got is only going to aid Lawrence's drive to make sure he implements all the right things within the framework of that new factory that's being built at the present time. And then once that sort of hits the ground fully working, hopefully, I'm sure, for both of them is going to be a mighty interesting journey for us to be watching. Absolutely. Well, can't wait. Now we mentioned earlier record-breaking 23 race season. Was going to be 24 until China dropped out. Now, James, is there any race you're particularly looking forward to seeing? I'm thinking maybe the American races, or anyone that you're particularly looking forward to.
Well, I really feel like Las Vegas is going to be the announcement that F1 has finally arrived in the US. We've had it, several times over Austin, Miami, but running down the strip, taking over, one of the most iconic cities in the world, it's a thing that's been envisaged happening maybe in New York, maybe in London with that demonstration, which now nearly 20 years ago. But actually happening for real is going to be the real confirmation. F1 has taken over to a certain degree. The main start finish straight actually being on the strip is going to be a spectacle which will become instantly iconic. So I think that's kind of the one that really stands out for me. And I guess as well it'd be interesting to see what happens at places like Saudi Arabia. There's now there's still lots of talk about racing in certain parts of the Middle East, and whether that will die down or actually whether these arguments will kind of fade away or get bigger. You worry there was that missile attack last time, and you wonder whether these kind of issues are just going to kind of like snowball and get bigger and bigger as we go along, and actually we'll stop even talking about the racing at certain points. But yeah, those are the kind of the Las Vegas and the talking points of Saudi are the ones that stick out to me. I don't know about Mark and Johnny, which ones for them?
Well, Vegas, yes, of course, it's Las Vegas, but the race has got to work as well. It can't be just being Las Vegas and then it's just follow a leader. There's got to be an entertainment factor to it. I think we all want that anyway. It doesn't matter what race we go to. That's a little bit like with the sprint races. They don't always work out perfectly, but the entertainment sometimes crosses over to Sunday, so that sort of works out. But yeah, Vegas is one thing. The Saudi thing, personally, I think it's something, I hope it sort of continues. I think it's a good thing that we're there to help the whole process of change down the line. But I always like Baku. Baku's something, if we can get these teams to fight it out, that seems to be the one that sparks something extra special. So Baku's always one I look forward to, but I hope it works in Vegas for sure.
Yeah, I mean, at Vegas in 81 and 82, and it was a wet squib. Yeah, because, the track, as you say, the race has got to work. The track is just rubbish. So, yeah, I mean, Vegas is emblematic, really, the rise and rise of F1, in the Netflix era. How long that can keep expanding is an interesting point, and also where it takes F1, not just geographically and politically, but just in the way that it presents itself. Part of the core appeal of F1 has always been it's been a bit sort of rebellious against the normal world. It's a different part of the world and doesn't necessarily traditionally encompass the same values and morals. But if you've gotten something that is so commercially successful that you run the risk of it becoming bland, especially if you're telling drivers what they can and can't say, which is we're starting to get into that territory now with the FIAs. And it's got to be a free-spirited thing, otherwise you're in danger of losing its core appeal. And I think that's where they've got to be very careful as they're expanding, because they might be expanding too quick to keep that core.
I think it's a really interesting point, and actually that may well become that theme of the season as it plays on. As Formula One moves into the mainstream, does it lose something of its soul, if you like, or if something that made it different? Arguably, it lost its soul a while ago. But I mean, does it lose something that made it different to other great sporting events and series that are around?
Well, I think we're in a better position now, because if I go back to when I was there in the 90s and I look back at what happened in the 80s, the domination was huge, huge seconds between front and back. And sometimes it went into double digits now and again as well.
Remember, in 92, if you were 2 seconds off the pace, you were on the second row of the grid.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I had the 107, when we took the 107 to Monaco after the 102, and I was 6th, but I was still 3 seconds off of Nigel. I was 6th. Yeah. And I think there was a Hockenheim race, I believe. I can't think it was Rennie Onu who was on pole, something like that. And it was about 12 seconds to the guy at the back. Yeah. So from the perspective of how close it's become, the exciting last couple of years that we've had of these battles, that is only going to be a positive thing. Yes, it's Vegas. Yes, we're in Miami. We're spreading around the rest of the world as well. But and that's why I go back to the entertainment is a very positive thing. I know there's a lot of talk of what they're going to be doing for 2026, for example. And what are they trying to achieve for 2026, as they tried to do for last year, is make the racing better. So if we make the racing better, the whole thing benefits from it. So it doesn't matter if you sort of go to more and more races and sort of dilute it in a way. If the entertainment works and the cars work and they can race together, then I think we're in a win-win.
And I remember, Johnny, you and I spoke fairly recently about the British Grand Prix, I think it was, and the demographic and the atmosphere at Silverstone, and how different that was now than it had been maybe in previous years, with maybe younger people, boyfriends, girlfriends, families there. It was a different type of feeling, which maybe was showing this move to the mainstream that Mark was talking about, and this idea that it's broadening its appeal, which has got to be a good thing.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think on TV, I remember, it was an average age was about 50, wasn't it? 45, 50, a couple of years ago. And is changing. And I see it visually when I go to Silverstone, as you've got.
Is that not just us getting older?
There's an element of that, Mark. I have to say, yes. Yeah, the gap's getting bigger, isn't it? Yes, exactly. But it's depressing when you say it that way. But it's a positive thing, and I think I've said before in other conversations I've had, the only country I ever saw this generation sort of coming back to the races with their kids was Japan. It was the only place I ever used to see that I remember when I raced there, it was the father bringing their kids along, and then when I was doing my stuff on TV, it was those kids bringing their kids along. And I didn't see that anywhere else until I saw it at Silverstone over the last couple of years. And even at the Autosport show, that I exactly the same thing. So that is a very positive thing for us, because we are finally bringing in this young generation that's engaging with the likes of Lando, for example. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant that what Lando can achieve on social media draws in these youngsters to it, and it's great.
Your following in Japan has stayed like, you still got a following in Japan, haven't you?
I have.
It's
I've
amazing.
still got my Japanese wife who turns
Yeah.
up every Grand Prix that I go to. But that's a big part of it, is where you can engage with the drivers for one. You can understand what they're doing on social media exactly, which then sort of draws you in even closer. Then it draws you to the racing at the same time. And I think that's what Formula One has been able to do over the last 5 years, I suppose, is make it more interesting from people. And the Netflix thing is the prime example of that. I think, bless you, Bernie, but I don't think it would have happened if he was still here now. And I think that's just where things move on, and it's having all these different ideas to be able to make the sport competitive, because it's not like it was in the 70s or 80s or even the 90s. There is more competition from so many other sports that are entertaining, and we've got to make Formula One entertaining as well, and it has become much more so.
100%. And just picking up on that competitive theme, Mark, obviously the second year, this year with the second year the new regulations, first year with Ben, are we expecting the racing to get closer, and does it have to, in order to prove the right or wrongness of the rule changes as they came in? Is that going to be an important thing that Liberty, that F1 are going to be looking at?
I think that aspect's still a work in progress. I think the racing was better under these regs than the end of the previous. They could follow each other closely for longer. It requires, I think, as a next step, something to be done with the tyres, further development of the tyres, which Pirelli are addressing. Ultimately, it's still a tyre limited thing. You can race for so long, longer than before, but it's still the limiting factor will tend to be tyres. At some circuits it's brake temperatures, but usually it's tyre temperatures. So you're usually having to drive to the tyre temperature after a while. So yeah, that's still a work in progress. I think there's no reason to suppose that it's going to go backwards this year. I think it'll be in racing terms much the same, although in competitive terms, as we talked about a while ago, we would really need to see that gap between the top three and the others close a little bit to sort of randomise it in an interesting way at different tracks. But
It should be close.
In the second year it should be, because everybody has got a pretty good handle on why they couldn't improve any further last year, and they understood the aerodynamic reasons and etc. So yeah, hopefully I think it should be better, and I think last year was already an improvement.
Yeah. And have there been any significant technical changes for this season over last season? I know that there's am I right in saying that the qualifying, there'll be differences in tyre use over certain races for qualifying?
Yeah, the most significant change is the raising of the floor at the head of the rear tyre and the throat height of the diffuser in the Venturi channels, which is has been done to make them a little bit less sensitive to the bouncing and the porpoising we saw last year. But the teams are still going to be trying to run them as close as they can to where you get the onset of that. It's just going to make them a little bit less sensitive. I don't think that's going to make a radical difference, to be honest.
No, that sort of reduced actually in the end of last season.
It had,
didn't it?
it was
to be honest,
well
everybody generally, Mercedes still had struggle.
It's there. There's performance there to be had. When you look at a wind tunnel, it's very, very tempting. So they'll keep trying to get there, and then they'll find that. All right, how do we get around the bouncing there? And then they'll find a different way of doing it. And this is sort of this minor changes sort of thrown that up into the air a little bit. But I'd be amazed if we got anybody with that sort of fundamental problem even by the first race.
No, I think definitely so, and I think with that it's only going to make the racing that little bit closer, even if we still only got the top three, because I think they will still be able to push each other closer than what we saw last year, as in following the car in front. And I think that would just make the racing that a little bit better. And the overtakes that we had last year, it was lovely to see drivers enjoying themselves, to be honest. So I think that's something that's only going to better benefit us. So yeah, looking forward to it, because we have that chance of the top three mixing it together, and then hopefully and potentially someone else just maybe get on the back of that and sort of trying to capitalise on maybe some strategy mistakes, for example. So
great. And I suppose finally, chances of Max winning again. I mean, are you willing to put your name, your names to this?
Yeah. Do you want a number? I don't think he will be as dominant as last year.
I agree.
But yeah, he absolutely still starts as favourite for me.
Yeah, no, I think so. And again, I hope Mercedes have actually been able to sort out the issues that they had last year, because when we went to Brazil, okay, yes, it was at altitude a little bit, but they have a car that has got what it takes to take it to Red Bull, but it's been able to use it when we do go to altitude, but actually when we come back down to sea level, and that seems to be their biggest problem that they had. So let's hope that happens, and then we've got to throw Ferrari in the mix at the same time, like we said before. So the ingredients are there to make it more difficult for Max. But will actually he enjoy that? Yeah, yes he will, and that's good, because I think that challenge from all those other drivers is going to be something he's going to be absolutely sort of hoping is going to happen, to be honest.
Well, the ingredients are there. Gents, thank you very much indeed. And thank you for listening. And remember, you can read more of Johnny and Mark and James in the Motorsport magazine, on sale at all good news agents and via our website. And you can read updates via our website as well as the season progresses. We're all looking forward to it, and we hope you are too. Thanks very much.